Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my heartiest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. Today, we are here for a special talk on India's urban transformation, marching towards Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030. The talk is being organized as part of the series, The State of Cities #City Conversation, which is organized by Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI. I would now like to request our moderator for today, Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, who is Associate Professor at Visva-Bharati University, Santiniketan, and Senior Visiting Fellow at IMPRI. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritika, and good evening to all of you. And also on behalf of Team IMPRE, welcome you all to this city conversation series. And just let me give you a brief background about the series. And as we know that India is expected to become 50% urban by 2050 and is banking on its cities for sustained economic growth. However, cities are underperforming in terms of their response to emerging challenges such as climate change, inequality in accessing services, resources and opportunities, informality, and so on. And there are also problems of unchecked urban expansion with negative social, economic, and environmental impacts. Now, this present COVID-19 crisis has further exposed the shortcomings of the Indian cities. And a glance at the SDGs shows that these are some challenges that the SDGs and their respective targets intend to address. And government has also responded to these challenges. For example, NITI Aayog has identified the Ministry of Urban Development as the nodal ministry for Goal 11 National Urban Policy Framework is there, which outlines an integrated and coherent approach towards the future urban planning in India. Apart from that, most of the government program guidelines mentions sustainability as part of their visions. And however, when facets of urban sustainability, what facets of urban sustainability do this program want to achieve and how to measure them are unclear. And if we look at the goals of different SDG goals, like for example, goal 1 of the SDGs aim to end poverty in all forms everywhere. Goal 6 is related to ensuring water supply and sanitation for all and sustainably manage them. Goal 11 of the SDGs aims to create inclusive, safe, sustainable human settlements. So, but the question is how? Do we need to rethink about our planning approaches? What are the governance reforms options? How to finance such activities? So, City Conversation series deals with some of these overreaching questions, and we have been engaging with the leading experts both in India across the world to deal with some of these challenges. And today we are really pleased to have among us Professor Jyoti Chandiramani, who is the director of the Symbiosis School of Economics and Dean, Faculty of Humanities and Social Science at the Symbiosis International University. And Professor Chandiramani has more than 35 years of experience in teaching and research. She teaches urban economic development, urban mobility, trade, aid and development, and international organization and regional cooperation. And in 2007, Professor Jyoti was awarded a short-term scholarship at the University of JPU Indianapolis. In 2013, she was a part of the Indian delegation to Pakistan for the 10th South Asian Economic Students Meet. And in 2015, she was invited to the 5th ASEM Rectors Conference and as a mentor for the student program at Prague in 2016. And she was also associated with Macquarie University as visiting faculty in 2018. And besides writing a couple of textbooks, she has jointly edited a book which is titled as Perspectives in Urban Development, Issues in Infrastructure, Planning and Governance. And her areas of research interest is in include urban infrastructure, urban transport, urban poverty, and she is presently working on Pune-centric issues. And besides, she keenly studies and follows trends in international development cooperation from MDGs to the SDGs. And she has also undertaken various research projects and consultancy in collaboration with NABARD, ITDP, Sulochana Thapar Foundation, and other reputed think tanks across India. And today, we are also honored to have Professor Seetha Prabhu as the chair, who is the visiting professor and senior advisor SDG to the Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, and the former Tata Chair Professor and Program Director of PMRDF scheme Minister of Rural Development, Government of India during the period 2013 to 18. She also headed the Human Development Resource Center, UNDP India. And Professor Prabhu has authored numerous research articles in leading academic journals and books, including Making Development Happen, Transformational Change in Rural India by Orient Black Swan, and Human Development in an Unequal World, published by Oxford University Press in 2019. And apart from that, we have as discussion today, Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar, former Deputy Mayor of Shimla and Senior Visiting Fellow of IMPRI, Mr. Unhale, Joint Commissioner, Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra. I think both of them will join us shortly. And also we have Dr. Simi Mehta with us, who is the CEO and Editorial Director of IMPRI. And with this short introduction, let me now request our chair, Professor Seetha Prabhu, to give our opening remarks. It's over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chatterjee. Can you hear me?
Yep.
And I also thanks to Dr. Chattopadhyay and to Dr. Arjun Kumar for inviting me for this very interesting conversation. And I see that this has been a regular feature of your institute of trying to involve people in this public debate, something that Professor Amartya Sen feels is the most important thing, to foster dialogue and foster public opinion and bring about a consensus on what the way forward is. And I'm also doubly happy that it is Professor Jyoti Chandiramani, who is the speaker, who's been a long-standing associate, friend, and I normally find her on the other side of the organization, organizing very interesting discussions and seminars, some of which I have participated in at the Symbiosis Institute of Economics. And today it's very good to be able to hear what she has to say on urban development. The topic is on urban transformation. I think this is a very timely sort of topic, because transformation is everywhere with us, I mean, whether we like it or not. Our lives have been completely transformed the past year and a half by this COVID-19. And we really do not know what the new normal will be and where we will settle down. But the talk on transformation even started much earlier, at least a decade ago, when we realized that the current development paradigm is not delivering the results that we wanted on the human development front. And that's the reason why in the year 2000 that we had the Millennium Development Goals that were formulated, so that there is a consensus at the global level on the basic values that should govern global development. While we know that the MDGs were truncated, they were top down, they were applied only to developing countries, and they were very reductionist approach. Nonetheless, they did focus attention on basic indicators that are essential for human flourishing. The SDGs that followed, I mean, in a sense they followed, but they went much beyond, both in terms of the participatory process that they had followed, as well as in the dimensions that they had included within their ambit. So for the first time, we have a standalone goal on urban dimensions of development, which I think is a very welcome feature, particularly because as emerging countries, particularly and developing countries, the proportion of urban population will be increasing rapidly. And by 2030, it's going to be quite large, more than about 60% at least. So with this dimensions in mind, I think that I would like to place the context of the urban transformation within that context of sustainable development goals and what they stand for. Very often when you are looking at goals, targets, indicators, there is a tendency to get lost in that whole web of 200 plus indicators, so many goals and so on. But I would like to first of all remind ourselves that what we need to be looking at is the values that govern the sustainable development goals. I think that is somewhere like the Millennium Declaration had very many valuable insights which got lost in translation in the MDGs. I hope that the SDGs, till now, I don't find much of evidence that we are mindful of the values of two basic values. They are not very many, but they are so core and fundamental of reaching, leave no one behind and reach the farthest first. These two values govern all the goals. And all that we do and all that we discuss on the sustainable development goals must have these as the core and as the underlying current. Because what we, as we have demonstrated now to ourselves, the development paradigm that we have followed all these years has just not delivered results. While we have progressed a lot in terms of economic growth, the dimensions of human suffering are just too large to be ignored. And the COVID-19 has actually accentuated and highlighted and brought them to glaring sort of sight, especially the urban migrants to urban areas walking back in our country hundreds of miles to reach their destination with little food and water and without any social security. And it almost seems that we are an uncaring, sort of population. So the dimensions of, human flourishing have been completely ignored in the earlier development paradigm. So when we talk of in sustainable development goals of urban development or any other dimension, we need to remember these values first and foremost. The second thing that I would like the speakers to consider is that SDGs are not just goals and indicators. For the first time, it's a very interrelated web of dimensions. And these huge interconnections between the various goals, targets, and indicators is very intriguing. And this means that the earlier approach of looking at development in silos, looking at it sectorally, will no longer deliver the results. It is an interconnection between various ministries, departments, and academics, politicians, as well as policymakers that requires to be forged. For example, even if you take just goal 11, it's intimately connected to goal 1, 3, 4, 6 on water and sanitation, 7 on clean energy, 12 on sustainable consumption and production, 9 resilient infrastructure, 16 good governance, 17 partnerships and means of implementation. So there is a whole range of things. I'm not discussing the trade-offs because direct trade-offs are not so many for goal 11, but the trade-offs come via goal 10, reducing inequality, sustainable consumption and production. So via the other goals, the trade-offs were also seep into the goal 11. So I think this is something that we need to think of, that interlinkages is something which is very important to consider. And whatever agenda we suggest, whatever actions we suggest must be mindful necessarily of the interlinkages. The third and last point that I would like to make is that the monitoring of SDGs depends very much on data. And while new indicators have been developed, new dimensions have been added to the bucket list of indicators that we want to monitor, equal and forceful action on getting the national statistical systems and the state statistical systems to up to speed on generating data, on monitoring these indicators has not been there. So much so that even at the global level, in the voluntary disclosure reports of countries, only 5 indicators have been taken up for goal 11. And even in India, we have only 2 targets in the SDG report of the Niti Aayog. Only 2 targets have been covered out of the 10. So I think this is a huge lacuna in the data systems. And there is and local data systems, generation of data at the local level, participation of the people at the local level is of the utmost importance. So I would not go too much into this, but I would just say that the aspect of climate change, the aspect of vulnerability in urban spaces, the issues of peri-urban areas, and to be mindful of the fact that we live in an unequal world. And this inequality is much more visible, glaringly so, in all pictures of all urban areas, more so in the mega cities. I think it is with this background that I would like now for the discussion, for the speakers to keep this in mind while they go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Prabhu. Now it's over to Professor Jyoti Chandiramani for your lecture. Please, ma'am, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Soumyadip. Thank you, Dr. Arjun. And a big thank you to Professor Seetha Prabhu for being here today. May I just check whether my PPT has reached Dr. Arjun? Because
No, ma'am. I'm refreshing.
Yeah.
But has it been sent?
Yes, it has been sent at 5:37. Otherwise, I can present it, not an issue.
Ma'am, please try share.
Yeah, I will.
Yes. Ma'am, are you able to share?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
It's good. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
With that out of the way, let me again say good evening to all the panelists over here. Good evening to the organizers, Dr. Arjun, Dr. Soumyadip, and again, a good evening to Professor Seetha and Simi. And thank you everybody for being here today. I really emphasized on the aspect of urban transformation, and then I thought I would come to the SDGs by and by. The SDGs that have been introduced in 2015, as Dr. Seetha talked about it, it was earlier, the 2000 had the Millennium Development Goals, and it has seen a certain change that has come out with more goals, more targets, more indicators, and a sea of indicators sometimes that you may truly get lost, with all of them being totally interlinked. When we talk about urban transformation, there's so much of literature on it in different ways and in different perspectives. And just to touch upon a few aspects, we heard about the Songdo model in South Korea, which came in 2001, where an absolutely new city came in. But when you look at the city in 2018 to 20, and you read literature on that, with a population of almost 50,000, it still looks like a ghost city lacking a heart, though having technology and all the aspects of sustainability there. You can put your garbage down the chute, you can monitor your light and your water, but cities don't get made just with technology. Coming close to our home in Pune, Lavasa, something that started in 2000, has been a failure, just 57 kilometers from here. And this was creating an absolutely new city. Because we talk about so many models, from rejuvenating to transformation to creating new cities with whatever other parameters, indicators, etc., that go on to making a city which is sustainable, which has equity aspect of it, it is inclusive, resilient, all the good, parameters that we think would make a society a better place to live. Well, that's something that again is not taken off very well. And the same thing can be talked about with Amravati, which was supposed to be a capital city, and again has had a certain issue with it. We've read about it in the papers. On the other hand, Navi Mumbai, something which was planned in 1971, today it features in the Ease of Living Index as rank 6 in 2021, 50 years down the line, and looks like a very budding city, whether it's its geographical positioning between Mumbai and Pune, or what are the factors, but the city has evolved and it has taken 50 years. When you talk about specific transformations, as a child, as I grew up in Mumbai, the BEST was a great name that we looked at. And I think that was a kind of a transformation. Why I say that? Because your electricity and your public transport was very well monitored. I remember going to school in a public bus, and it was absolutely on the time. There was no problem. And I would say this was one of the good practices, good transformations of a city way back in the 60s and the 70s. As recently as now, Mumbai has safe drinking water, and it has been tested across various parameters. And could you imagine that you could actually have open the tap in Mumbai and drink water? You always think of the city as buzzing with people, etc. But there is evidence since 2019 on this front. Swachh is another intervention in Pune, and so is the zero load sharing framework, where in the early 2000s we had I'm concentrating on the zero load sharing module in Pune, where we had power outages and we had power which was down because there was too much of demand over supply, and how Punekars, whether it was industry, whether it was the MSEB, whether it was a regulatory authority, came up with a load sharing model where corporates, IT companies, industries would go into the captive power plant at that point of time to ensure that households would get their quality of electricity to be able to live a comfortable life even during the summer months of in Pune in the month of April, May. The Delhi transport system, which talks about free bus transport for women, yes, it is transformatory to me from my perspective, but we've had Finland and another number of European cities from 2013 which have talked about free transport. And free transport in some cities have backfired because it's the pedestrians and the cyclists who go onto free transport. And therefore, the congestion and the traffic has not really changed. These were just examples of the past of transformation. So transformation has been happening, has been evolving. And one lesson that I take from here going forward is famous Say's law that we say in economics that supply creates its own demand. And I think it was the supply of the public transport in various other aspects with Navi Mumbai that really took it to where it is right now. So in urban, you need to create supply, you need to create service deliveries, but the Songdo model also tells us another story that it's not just services, but you need to match it with so many things. That's because urban is such a complex phenomena. It is a multitude of schools of thought that come together and have to come out with solutions, which therefore it could be from the geographical point of view, historical point of view, the anthropological point of view. Sustainability is there, design, but at the end of it, you even need the legal aspect to take it. Otherwise, with no legislation, you would not be able to progress with urban. And therefore, interdisciplinary as it is in its approach, it would definitely need to go in for its convergence, as I say, with all disciplines that come in for transformation to be successful. So my first takeaway from here is A, supply creates its own demand. And two is that the convergence of multiple disciplines is going to help in coming out. As Professor Seetha rightly said, that you need debates and discourses from different perspectives to be able to come up with participatory solutions as we move on. When we talk about, the title of this talk was India's Urban Transformation. And when I look at it and I try to map it with, the transformation that took place across, we can see that there's, while in 1972, there was a conference on human environment in Stockholm. 1972 also was the Club of Rome, which talked about limits to growth. Okay, we've had Habitat 1, and based on Habitat 1, we've had the National Commission on Urbanization being set up in 86 in India. Straight away, 1992-93, you have the 74th Constitution Amendment Act. Then you come down straight to 2005 and you have JNNURM. Between 1992 to JNNURM, there were environment status reports that had to be created by various cities. It was mandated. And therefore, we did talk about all these issues way back, 25 years back, ever since 1992. But still, we have out of the 20 most polluted cities, almost 13 of them are in India, and probably Delhi, the most polluted capital in the world. Moving down from 2005 to 2020, the last 15 years has seen us move in, at least with the policy framework, which talks very much in the values that we, that Seetha ji talked about, and that are desirable for society, for livability, for equity, for inclusion. And of course, lessons are going to be learned from resilience that comes out as we learn more and more lessons. We've seen how Odisha has been able to overcome the cyclone issues where even a small child in Orissa knows what he has to do if a cyclone comes in. That was the kind of disaster management training that had gone in with UNDP and the government in Odisha. And of course, these are lessons that we will have to take in the next 15 years next 10 years that we talk about with respect to SDGs. I'm sure the targets will have to be, the goalposts will have to be shifted, because we are going to be set back on a number of goals, given the present pandemic, which was really a force majeure that is going to not help us fulfill contracts that we are looking towards fulfilling. Coming to 1986, as I said, the National Commission, this is something I don't want to spend too much time on. But yes, there was not much talk on urbanization till then. And yes, it was the first commission which talked about the state, the priorities, the guidelines, the policy framework, the institutional framework, and everything that was pertaining to urban was really spoken over here, with Charles Correa as the chairperson of this particular committee, of this commission. In 1993, the 74th Constitution Amendment Act came into being, and therefore the third tier of governance really got its legs to perform. But yes, very often you have the framework, but how effective is the framework is something that is to be seen. We can see even today in COVID times how some cities have been very, very, have converted their wards into war rooms, whereas some cities have oxygen shortages, geographical locations where probably industries are not there, but they are grappling with situations which probably have not been, taken into account. And yet Nandurbar, one of the most backward districts of Maharashtra, I think many of you must have read how there was a policy and framework already there by the, district commissioner, and putting a action plan where he could foresee a second wave and a third wave that comes in. So when you have local governance, you need regional planning at the district level. You have, your functions clearly defined, but yet the participation is weak. ULBs are not as strong as we would want them to be. And we can see that these governance structures have been around since 1992-93, but we always read, whether it's in the World Bank book, report of 2015, that India's urbanization is hidden and messy. Hidden because you are not including a large part which is urban but does not get included in urban, and messy because of the large number of slums where livability conditions are totally what you would say are sometimes inhuman. Of course, I think way back in the 90s, we would even talk about them, the slums. I mean, we've moved from slums being something that you wanted to get rid of to a whole new topic and a very inclusive way of rehabilitation, reconstruction, redevelopment, in situ development. And I think the whole philosophy and the framework has moved in a positive direction in terms of talk and policy framework. But yes, we have to count, we have to measure, we need the data to see how it is moving. And then comes the JNNU-RM, which was actually the first transformation mission on a very large scale, very often spoken by critics as the benevolence of the central government, showering on, aid to various grants to various states. And therefore, you had the 4 submissions that were there under the JNNU-RM, the urban infrastructure and governance, which had 42% of the funding that has been earmarked above 1,20,536, 1,20,536 crores. Basic services for urban poor. It's been talked about in 2005. It's been talked about in SDG 11. It's been talked about in the economic survey as the last in chapter 12, where you talk about basic needs, minimum needs that need to be addressed. So the talk is happening, and yes, The measurement is also happening. I think large number of indexes are being put up, but coming back, there were these 4 interventions for transformation, which were introduced in 2005-6. I think one of the biggest interventions in India, in the 21st century. You had the 4 schemes that were there, funded by the center, supported by the state, where the urban local body would also come in. It was to bring about reforms to the urban local body, 23 reform interventions. But unfortunately, it was more metropolis oriented towards large cities. Select states, census towns at that time were not so much measured. They were not so high, but immediately after that, in the 2011, we saw almost 2,000 census towns emerge, which Amitabh Kunduji calls it census activism that happened in. And then number of schemes were submerged during this period. Yes, the JNNURM did face limited success. And I think I have to share this, that when we were doing our research on this, it used to be very often referred to as the gutter water meter, JNNURM, because I think everywhere you talked about these kind of things. And in Kalyan Dombivli, when we would go there for some work, this was the way it was referred to. Okay, now this is what we are going to get. The JNNURM buses, whether they were in Shillong, they were in Hubli, they were in Pune, a large number of cities out of the 65 cities, parastatals were equated to urban local bodies because we were accepting that, our urban governance was weak and that our basic service delivery was weak at that point of time. So I really feel 2015 to 2021, where have we reached and where is our basic service delivery? What have we done towards this transformation, where an SDG framework has come in with so many targets, indicators, though there are 17 and SDG 11 is with urban, but cutting across all 17 goals, they all touch upon lives of people, whether rural, urban, peri-rural, so the regional aspect is all over. When you looked at JNNURM, yes, it had limited success. Only 42% of its projects were completed, and you could see its allocations was more towards water, sewage, drainage, and of course roads and flyovers. And this was how it performed at the end of its 7-year period, which was then extended. Again, as we see, the 4 schemes were concentrated in certain states. This is not new of the present government. This is new. This is a path with every government, where schemes are very often allocated to states which are related to, the elections, the political economy that does exist. But when you look at it, Maharashtra is undoubtedly has the largest urban population. And then you could see the coalition with West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh. And so it was 42% of the allocation was done in a few states. 63% of VSUP allocations were done in Maharashtra, West Bengal, Delhi, Andhra Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh. And it was, you could see, a concentration of a few select states, few select metropolitans, where Delhi and Kolkata received nearly 2,000 crores, while Mumbai, Pune, Chennai received more than 1,000 crores for its transformation. Well, moving further, this was also a period where the HPEC and the McKinsey Global Institute report talked about the benchmarking that had to be done for urban services. So whether it was water supply, it was benchmarked at 150 liters per capita per day per individuals 24/7. The share of public transportation should go up to 50%. That you should have 9%, this middle parameter here, 9% for parks and open spaces, square meter per capita, 100% sewage, 100% solid waste management, and of course, 0 slum population. The investment plan was also defined during this period, but you could see that from this table that rural was always given more of emphasis in the 11th plan rather than urban. And there is a certain aspect which the likes of Ishwarja Jaluwalia and others who put in a lot of effort with respect to the future of urban development, where HPEC, she chaired the entire thing, and they came up with the figure that was required with respect to urban infrastructure investment for the period 2012-31, which was further broken up for urban roads, urban transport, and all the other parameters that was there. My point of sharing all this with you is that investments have been defined, benchmarks have been laid. 2005 has, the 73rd and 74th Constitution Amendment Act goes 25 years back. You have the Millennium Development Goals, JNNURM, and even between 2005 and 12, you had large number of policies that came in with respect to National Urban Transport Policy. Then you had the Rakesh Mohan Committee, which talked about urban transport, also a very large document that had been introduced. You can see the service standards that were laid, and therefore the pitch has been laid out for the future development that needs to be envisaged. And this is what I really want to talk about at this point of time. One of the good practices that came out of the JNNURM was that the PEARL, or the Performance, Experience and Reflective Learning, great case studies were discussed. In Pune, Pimpri-Chinchwad Municipal Corporation, helium-based link detection was carried out for water supply, because there was a lot of leakage in water, and though you were wanting to give 180 liters per capita as to the population, but you were not able to realize it. So therefore a French operator worked with them during the period of Jan to July 2012 to look at how water could be saved with terms of leakage and bring in new technology for all this. Further, the 12th plan, the last of the plans that we saw, actually highlighted the fact that small cities with less than 1 lakh population are underserved. Undoubtedly, they are a mess. They are a chaos, and therefore transportation, piped water, and all other services need to be concentrated over here. Therefore, a holistic approach to spatial development was highlighted in the 12th plan. Then came the 2011, before that, the 2011 census, and we got to realize that really the change in the census towns that you could see in 2011, jumping up from 1362 to 3894, 2532 additional census towns that got created, changed the manner in which urban is. Today, urban is messy, it is hidden, the definition is stringent, it does not include all aspects which are urban looking and do not have the urban infrastructure or the framework that is required for such cities. And therefore, what are we creating? We are creating a chaos which is going to become difficult to deal with in the next 10 years. So while you are having these huge targets and indicators to look at, but the very definition of urban, which does not have governance framework for census towns, while they're considered as urban but don't have strong governance structures, is something that we definitely need to look at. Another point that I wanted to highlight from this particular table is the very large villages with population of more than 5,000 has almost 15% of the population living here. And this is under the panchayat, which does not have the strength and the capability to change it to the way urban needs to be created for the future. In this backdrop where we see COVID, which is totally concentrated in the large cities, it is time that we even looked at the neglected smaller cities. Again, in my point in JNNURM, I talked to you about how it was really a focus on large cities that took place over there, the metropolis. The definition of urban as per the 2011 is extremely stringent and has a minimum population of 5,000. At least 75% of the main working population is engaged in non-agricultural pursuits, and a density of population of at least 400% per square kilometers, which is then can be a second category of towns, which is then known as census towns. If these are stringent, so if you don't have any one of these criterias, you cannot be then defined as urban. And therefore, when I have studied a large number of papers on census towns and looked at the 19 census towns in and around Pune district and in the neighboring, we find it chaotic, messy, unplanned, and it's missing the targets that we would want to look at. Again, when it comes to urban and the new technologies that define it with respect to in terms of, you have the administrative definition of urban, the census. And again, I'll just go to the satellite built up towns. You can see that Uttar Pradesh, as per satellite built up, is 79% urban, whereas as per census, it is 22. Maharashtra is 45% urban, but as per satellite built up, it is 59.58% urban. And all India is 31 as per 2011. And when you look at the satellite, it goes to 63.02% urban. The testing of the degree of urbanization at the global level, which has taken place in the European Union with a large number of stakeholders, the OECD, the UN, etc., defines India's urbanization in 2015 as almost 54%. The built-up area again at about 53%, and if you add the clusters, then it would have a population of almost 78% urban, and a built-up area of again almost of the same amount. But when it comes to the land, it is only about 2.4% is with the true urban. And if you look at both the urban center and the urban cluster, it would only be around 5.5% approximately. That means almost 95% of the land is still with the rural. And this is one aspect of resource allocation that we have to understand land economics in this context. And this of course just gives you the same data that I showed you earlier. A study conducted by Santosh Mehrotra shows that between 2004-05 and 2017-18, almost 14 million people have moved out of agriculture. Not necessarily to urban, not necessarily in migration, they could be informal labor, but obviously there's this big decline that has to be seen, and they would be moving into maybe census towns, into informal sectors, etc. Even of late, after the second wave, almost 32 lakh people have left the state of Maharashtra to go back to various towns. There is a migration out of agriculture, and I think this is something that we really need to look at moving forward. So here is where I come, therefore, the SDG 11. And what does it talk about? Inclusive, resilient, cities of tomorrow. And it talks about housing, sustainable transport, inclusive, participatory, the things that we've already spoken about earlier. But one of the aspects that really is very close to my heart is 11.A, the strengthening of national and regional development planning. Urban local bodies are not going to be able to do this on their own. The stronger ones will, but you would need to have very strong district level and taluka level, block level planning, the metropolitan region, the peri-urban areas that get included, so that invariably the poor are the ones who get pushed to the periphery. And moving with that, in fact, 11B really talked about, mitigation and adaptation to climate change and resilience to disaster. And we know how resilient we've been to this current situation that COVID has come out with. So of course, there's no doubt that at this junction with the SDGs that have been put in since 2015, we do have an opportunity to set up, credible baselines for cities, for slums, to take historical data forward. But what is very important is that I think invariably what's going to happen is you're going to put your health infrastructure into place often. So over the years, you've found, with the new government coming in 2014, the Smart City Mission came in, Amrut was introduced in 2015, PMAY was in 2015, and Ruben, which again looks at the regional development and the sense, the making smart villages, as they talk about, the total clusters that are allocated over here. So the policy framework is there. The philosophy is that of SDGs, but the outcomes that we see have wide gaps that need to be filled with, we as academicians, we as researchers point out these glaring gaps. We have deliberations on this front and therefore see how it needs to go forward. You have the ease of living index. I've skipped the earlier slide because I think I'm running short of time and I need to allow it to go further for discussion. So you have the quality, this has been introduced since 2017. The framework has been changed. Some of the parameters of governance which were here have been moved into the Municipal Performance Index governance. So large number of indexes coming in, large number of measurements happening. But very often you realize that, you're just measuring something and then the parameters have changed in the 3 years, whether it was 2017, the 18, 19, and 20. The parameters have changed. You can see in quality of life, education. So as I said, the talk is all there, even in the economic survey, which was tabled on 30, in the last day of January 2021. And let's look at which of the cities were there in the ease of living index as number one. It was Bengaluru. We know Bengaluru is water stressed. We know they have their congestion, that the speed of the city, negotiating the city, has really come down. Its air quality index has moved down. It's got over 350,000 cases. So where is this, really mapping up? Pune, which is the second in the ease of living index, again, has its own set of certain problems, whether it is congestion. The air quality has definitely deteriorated. And it's only recently in the last few days that Bengaluru has taken over with respect to the number of cases that are there of the COVID-19 in the district of Pune. Almost for a population of 95 lakhs to 1 crore, it's almost more than 10% of the population, if you look at it, has been infected. And then Delhi, which is on the 13th, is probably one of the worst capitals in the world, where I have read a particular article which has even recommended moving the capital out of shifting the capital state, that Delhi should no longer be the capital state because of the kind of pollution that is there. And Nagpur is the other. Of course, with Pune, we know that a large number of districts surrounding it bring in. So there is some amount of divergence here, or maybe the ease of living index, which is throwing up certain parameters, is the density aspect is telling us another story. And therefore, there are certain inconvenient questions that one will have to pose. Maybe this is something that, Dr. Arjun can think of and Dr. Soumyadip can think of in the future. That do we need to cap our cities, because every city has a carrying capacity. We talked about limits to growth. This is inconvenient conversation, but it is definitely time for us to discuss this. And based on this, we've had the the 15th Finance Commission giving higher allocations. But along with the 15th Finance Commission, you've had the GST that has come in since 1st July. And the GST has again paralyzed the urban local body like never before. we are expecting so much out of cities. Cities are supposed to be growth centers, but if you do not have your funding, if the only two sources of income that come back to the city is the property tax and the fee charges, everything else is subsumed. Therefore, then the city will have to develop, will have to depend majorly on the state, and the state on the center, and then we are expecting some aspects which would be a little difficult to look at. So I'll move further and come to my recommendation over here. My recommendations for transformation in the future and the way forward is redefining urban, going more by the global definition so that we can be comparable. We are a country with almost 18% of the world population. And while we say we are about 480 to 490 million as urban, it could be as high as 800 million urban, and therefore 300 million are not being counted with the services and the quality that is to be there. We need to definitely come up with systems that can address urban breakdown, the kind that we have seen over the last 1 year. Data limitations is exactly what Seetha ma'am had talked about, and I just reiterate that point. We need to have disaster management like how Odisha's has come up with. We need to look at that. Digitization is supposed to be the next form that's going to be able to bring in more inclusion with artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. I think technology can play a big role. But I have also talked to you about Songdo, where technology is not going to be the answer for everything. I think we do need, and I think discussions have already happened about policies favoring urban migrants. So this is work in progress. What really is required is strong implementations in the future. You need to have in your present education history of pandemics that need to be added very, very clearly, because this is something which has taken us totally off guard. And how many places we still do understand that people's behavior, their culture is still not accepting of the behavior of COVID the way it is expected to be of us. Urban local bodies are totally lacking in capacity. And I think we are, whether it is the teacher-student ratio, whether it is the nurses-doctors ratio according to the WHO standards, the only ratio where we stand well is with respect to NGOs. And maybe that's what is, the lifeline of India. In Maharashtra, the state from where I've been born and brought up, crowdfunding has actually happened to a very large extent, even with respect to education infrastructure. So when we worked on a recent project on SDGs in all the districts of Maharashtra for NABARD, we realized that almost 217 crores was crowdfunded to bring in infrastructure in rural schools and a lot of schools where, the blocks took it upon them and it was extremely successful. I think even in Pune now and in other places, crowdfunding is even happening with respect to COVID for phase 3. Already the government has talked about the development financial institutions that need to be put up, which is totally absent to bring in urban infrastructure into place. And I think it is time we move beyond policy towards action-oriented, realizing outcomes where we say that this is what needs to be measured and the outcome needs to be realized. An urban governance framework should make ULBs accountable, but then how do you make them accountable if they don't have their own funding? So my last point is always, I love this particular picture, that cities are very Janus looking. One face is always looking at improving. Good happens, but the good in cities is always overshadowed or eclipsed by the negative news that comes in. So the negative news eclipses some of the good news that may come in. So the others, so we always see that you look at the past, you plan for the future, and take a simple example of Mumbai, which is talking about the metro, and thousands of crores have gone into the metro and the coastal road. And what happens if the entire business moves out and it becomes a ghost city like Detroit? And then you have, there's so much of concentration of investment in one. You have a work from home culture. You change things other than where you need to be. And therefore, I think the plan that we make for the future is going to be even more difficult because of the present changing dynamics. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So am I audible? Well, so thank you, Professor Chandiramani, for your very interesting presentation. It's really insightful in the sense that you rightly mentioned, or the India's journey towards urban transformation, and why the fulfillment of SDG goals could be crucial for making the cities inclusive, the core value which should govern the SDGs, the sustainable development, as Professor Seetha already mentioned in her opening remarks. And also you rightly mentioned the importance of convergence of multiple disciplines, which could be useful for guiding India's urban transformation. And I'm afraid that this is seriously, we lack this kind of interaction and all these things. So, and also you quite rightly mentioned that it appears from your entire presentation that the sustainability and the equity of services are the two key challenges facing the Indian cities, and the current levels and targeting of budget allocations are not sufficient to address them. You mentioned about many urban development plans and policies which are initiated by which have been initiated by the government, both at the central level as well as some of the state level, but definitely those are inadequate, and this may require a doubling, a tripling, or maybe a quadrupling of the current expenditure levels, which will need the increased domestic resource mobilization as well. That means financial empowerment of the urban local body is another crucial factor if we want to achieve the sustainable development goals. And also you mentioned about the policy statements. For example, you mentioned about the decentralization and all these things, and you highlighted how the policy statements concerning the effective institutions are in place, but provisions for institutional strengthening or the processes are almost absent. Urban governance system is quite weak. You mentioned about the JNURM, but again, the poor implementation really merged the effectiveness of the JNURM. There is an evident big city bias, and also then you mentioned about the benchmarking of the urban basic services, and then the strengthening of the national and regional development planning. Although, again, in 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, we have the provision for Metropolitan Planning Committee, District Planning Committee, but again, these are not properly implemented. And urban local bodies, you rightly mentioned, that are ill-equipped to do this kind of joining of the national and the regional development planning policy. And then you raised a very crucial question, like, do you need to cap our cities? Like, what would be the optimum size of the cities? So in fact, this is the question with which we are deliberating upon, and I'm sure that if Mr. Unhale is, maybe he will be joining shortly. So he has been advocating this quite vigorously, like what should be the optimum size of the city. And you rightly mentioned that we expect our cities to be the engines of growth, but they have remained hamstrung due to the incomplete decentralization, improper implementation of all the other urban development policies and plans. So we need to rethink our urban policies, and this COVID-19 thing, this pandemic has given us the option, the opportunity to rethink the entire urban system, urban plan, and urban policies. So let me now, with these things, let me now move over to our discussion. Dr. Simi Mehta, if you could please.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes.
Your comments.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Jyoti, for such an illuminating lecture. And my intervention would be from the vantage point of me being a student of political science and how it has its ramifications on the urban understanding. So to begin with, we very much want that an urban transformation that is going to happen or that is happening has positive ramifications insofar as its implications on the population are concerned. In this
I believe that the role of politics and administration towards urban transformation, it becomes very, very crucial. Because all the data that you have provided, all the studies that you have provided, it so far is academically it means a lot, but how far it is translating on the ground level needs to be really understood. Uh, Second point is that the trade-off between the goals, the sustainable development goals, which Professor Seetha was talking in the beginning, I believe that the goal 11 and 13 have a lot of bearing upon goal 5 of gender equality in urban transformation. Because the planning processes that have to be that have to incorporate the diversity in the voices for urban transformation, especially those that are in the that have been marginalized, the women, the elderly, the specially enabled, the third gender, etc. So unless and until we have their voices incorporated in the planning processes, I think we will be far away from achieving the real transformation that we need. So my open question is whether India's urbanization is a paradox of sorts. Any transformation cannot have such inequities and inequalities prevailing for over a long period of time. As you mentioned, we have had urbanization commission in the 1980s, and we are here in the third decade of 21st century. So my next point is that the scientific urban governance with I believe that a scientific urban governance with an apolitical and an objective approach may ensure that our urban areas will become more resilient in the times to come. And further, there is a lot of work that is needed when we have to harmonize the old with the new, you know, the conventions, the traditions with the newer values, and this will lead to some sort of an authenticity in our planning process. And this authenticity would mean maintaining of the local character of the city, strengthening the local heritage, the culture, its environment, while also incorporating the social, economic, and technological changes. So this otherwise we will still be dealing with the question that while we may have urban transformation, we will still be reeling under the question, the transformation is for whom. And my final point is that is about the need for democratizing urban transformation. So it again circles back to incorporation of diversity of voices and aspirations of the people. So I will end here and I'll make my next points in the next round. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Simi, and I think Professor Chandiramani will answer all your points which have already raised. And let me now request Sri Kirti Shah, who is the eminent urban activist, enthusiast, and practitioner, and who is the founder and president of INHF India Habitat Forum and the director of KSA Architects. We are really honored to have you, Mr. Shah, and if you please join us and share your comments on today's topic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, I'm totally unexpected. As a matter of fact, I got this invitation about this session just 10 minutes before it started. And I'm absolutely fortunate to have opened and heard Jyoti ji. It was absolutely brilliant. Jyoti ji was remarkable. And I was very delighted that I heard you. Of course, I'm not prepared to kind of comment on this because I'm unwell and trying to kind of, I'm bedridden more or less. But I think the few points that I would like to make very quickly is one, I'm very glad that you remember National Commission on Urbanization. The reason I'm saying is this, that the National Commission on Urbanization happened in mid-80s. And I thought it was a very visionary statement. Prime Minister at that time said, if cities are the future of this country, he said, we are not looking after them well. We don't have proper well, and we are not looking at them as we should look at them. And therefore, he put together this National Commission on Urbanization to think through India's or examine India's urban future. Second important thing that I would like to mention, I think, which was very special about the National Commission on Urbanization, that even though it was an initiative by the Government of India, it worked under Government of India tutelage for 3 years. It had a full-time secretariat operating from the ministry. All 10 people in the commission were outsiders. There was not a single government person in that. What that particular meant was this: there's a huge amount of knowledge, understanding, perceptions outside the governmental system. And it was a design that let us listen to people, let's listen to civil society, let's listen to professionals, let's listen to kind of people, academics and people who are on this. And and not many people know that National Commission on Urbanization produced those 17 documents, were remarkably good, positive work. And I'm saying this, and even though Jyoti didn't mention me, I was one of the members of the National Commission on Urbanization. It's a privilege. Second thing that I would like to mention, I think, is Jyoti ji mentioning this urban contradictions. You essentially have use of living indexes on the one hand, and you look at the condition of cities, you don't really have confidence in those ease of living, indexes at all. What's happening? What are we measuring? And what are we telling, I think, citizenry about our cities? And I think this contradiction needs to be understood, need to be dealt with, and to be examined. And the small last point which I wanted to make, and I think Jyoti ji mentioned it in passing, she covered so many things that I'm surprised that she could cover so much in such a short time. But the whole aspect of economic growth and cities, we are putting together a webinar in the next month, most probably, on $5 trillion kind of ambition and its implication on cities, its role on the role cities must play in happening. And I think this is something critically important. If you're talking about cities of engines of economic growth, if you're essentially expecting, that the 67, 70% of the growth to happen in the cities, you've got to examine whether you're making cities productive, whether making cities efficient, and whether what we have would lead to that. And I think, this interesting slide that you showed, where she talked about just 2%, 2.5% of the land mass under cities and extended to 5%, you've got to examine in terms of what kind of resource base we have. So it was remarkable listening to you, Jyoti ji. I was completely unprepared to kind of comment, but thank you, IMPRI, for this opportunity. Thank you very much. And I need to talk to you, Jyoti ji, on this after this event. I was very impressed. Thank you very much.
Sir, I will share the number. Yes.
Thank you.
Soumyadip.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. Nevertheless, you have mentioned or you have raised so many important points. So without wasting further time, let me just move over to Mr. Tikender Panwar, who is the Deputy Mayor of Shimla Municipal Corporation and also Senior Fellow of IMPRI. So it's over to you for your comments.
So we are not able to hear you, Tikender sir. Sir, if you can rejoin, sometimes it works. You can leave and rejoin. It should, no. Let me call you. Soumyadip sir, why don't you proceed then? Yes.
Okay. So I think then, ma'am, could you please, on the basis of this presentation and the discussion, if you could please
certainly.
share your comment.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's been a rich fair so far, that we have had a range of issues that have been highlighted, right from Jyoti's wide coverage of various issues relating to urban. I think we have looked at the convergence issues, what is required in terms of the policy framework that exists and what changes are required regarding the technicalities of ranking cities. We've also looked at the best practices that are there. There are best practices galore from various cities that are cited. And we have governance issues and the very definition of the urban areas itself, and issues of, with respect to land, the baselines that are required, and so on. You already summed up quite well her main points. So I would like to bring to the table the aspects that have, I think Mr. Tikender is now online. Should I continue?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, you can please continue. Yes, then we can go to Jyoti ma'am, then we have Tikender sir and Samir sir. Then we can go to second round. Yes, please.
Okay. So as we look at it, I would like to bring to the table a few issues that we need to discuss most, drawing from the discussion that has already happened. One is several of the initiatives that are there that the urban, with respect to urban areas, with respect to policy, are all about urban development. Now, our urban development and urban transformation are two different things. When you're looking at transformation, you're looking at changing what exists because and thinking out of the box. When you're looking at urban development, then you are stuck in the same framework, which may or may not work. And we have seen that there is inequity in various dimensions, inequity of distribution of resources, inequity in living conditions within the cities, inequity in the definitions of cities, most of the resources going only to large cities, not to peri-urban areas or to the small towns where actually the need is much, much more. And the COVID-19 has exposed the glaring sort of inequities in health infrastructure where basic facilities are not there, and several of the PHCs themselves are locked and there are no staff that is available. So I think we have a huge problem there. So we need to talk more on urban transformation, how to change what exists rather than go on the same lines of urban development. As long as we do not make this distinction, I think we will be barking up the wrong tree and we will miss all targets, forget the targets whether national, local or global. Second things, we also need to take into account the vulnerability of populations. I think this is extremely important. While the multidimensional poverty in cities, in urban areas may be lower than that in rural areas, as various estimates have shown of MPI, I think the point is missed if we are looking only at poverty, because the basic services requirements and the vulnerability of the people, which once again, the COVID-19 has not generated a new problem. It has only highlighted the inequities that are already there in glaring view. So much so that we are surprised at the magnitude of the issue as well as the depth of poverty that exists. And many more are likely to slip back into poverty because of the lack of livelihoods, incomes for an extended period of time. And many of the informal workers in urban areas are not self-employed, they are wage workers. And if the wages are not coming, then naturally they're going to slip back into poverty. So do we have these urban areas as holding areas for the rural poor to come and then eke out a living in urban? Or are we going to have some strategy that takes care of the rural in rural or enable their transition to peri-urban and small towns? It's an issue that we can no longer neglect. And I would say that this requires a very great lens from all of us and not confine ourselves only to the urban, but I would request all of you to take a look at the peri-urban and the rural-urban the continuum, which is much more, evolving. A lot of attention. I think there's inequity in attention also from academicians, that we look largely at the cities and the urban areas and conglomerates, partly because of the data availability for these little better than that of, if you want to work on peri-urban areas or small towns, where is the data that is available? You just have no data that, unless you collect your own. And I think that is the lesson. I'll come to the third part, that if we want monitoring of various development indicators, whether they be called SDGs or MDGs or whatever goals, we need to generate data at the local level for local use, and not necessarily to be scaled up and then put into big policy documents at the central level or at the state government level, but at the local level. Now, there are various exercises. I've dealt with human development reports, and interestingly, we had a human development report for Mumbai. We had a human development report for Shimla in 2009. It threw up a range of issues. I was in the UNDP, and I had the privilege of leading that effort from UNDP, working with the state governments. And these human development reports, which were prepared in a very participatory manner with discussions at the local level with the people of the city, did throw up a range of issues and solutions to the challenges that were being faced. I think it's time that we generate local level data using participatory methods, and maybe institutions like Symbiosis can do it for Pune, and maybe IMPRI can think of initiating some local level studies to generate data using our vast youth and student cohorts who are interested in looking at it. Recently, I had a association with the ISDM, where they were trying to look at district level human development reports. I mean, the effort was truncated because they could not go to the field. But I think it is necessary to involve our youth in looking at local areas, mapping out the indicators. And for the SDGs, I must mention that the government of Maharashtra has actually taken up a large-scale study on 13 districts where data was generated on these sustainable development goals at the taluka level by Tata Institute of Social Sciences. The effort has been led by Professor Sanjay Iyer, and the data is now finalized and almost ready for release. So I think we do not have data, and depending on state statistical agencies to generate data on SDGs is like waiting for eternity. We need to do something about it, and we can do it at the local level with the help of youth, colleges, and others at the local level. So I think we need to seriously look at it, because if there is no data, there is no planning. As Joseph Stiglitz said, we focus on what we value. We measure what we value. Obviously, we do not value a migrant labor. We do not value the existence of small towns and cities. We do not value the basic facilities that are required. And therefore, on many of these things, we do not even collect data. On the poverty figures, we do not have adequate data, and so on. So I think one of the suggestions that I would give is that we try and generate local level data by whatever means, by using standard statistically valid approaches, so that it is not, I mean, there are numerous NGOs whose role can be really crucial. One of the, if BRAC can do what it did in Bangladesh, there's no reason why we could not generate that type of momentum to mobilize people. But all this would require a greater deal of capability enhancement, and that is something that we need to look at. From my point of view, I think the most crucial thing is cities, infrastructure, I mean, transportation, resilience, yes, but then ultimately cities are meant for people. And where are the people? And what are we doing for the people is a big question that we need to look at. And how can we, empower them? How can we enhance their capabilities to participate? And how can we respect diversity in the cities? How can we ensure transparency, equity, and efficiency, and democratic decision making? There are enough examples across the globe, particularly in Latin America, where citizens make decisions regarding the city budgets. So these are some of the practices that we need to look at. I have nothing against good practices. In UNDP, we used to do that all the time of documenting good practices and saying that these are good. But then the scale, can we deal with millions of people, tens of millions of poor who are there? I mean, depending on the definition of poverty, you have anything from 65 to 100 plus million population who require attention. Any of the best practices, I have nothing against them. I'm all for it. But are they scalable? Can we meet the deprivation levels are huge and intense? Can the magnitude of effort that we put in, it's not one good practice here or there, but can we have the magnitude of effort that is required to lift these people out of the situation that they are in? I think that is the important thing. We do not even have a roadmap, frankly. We are just like, doing something here, something there. They do not add up. It's not a coherent strategy, each feeding into the other with the people participating. And there must be a public debate. You're doing your bit on generating public debate, but as long as we debate amongst ourselves, among the converted, I don't think transformational change is possible. And transformational change has to begin by understanding the ground situation. And I've had excellent experience with some of the HDRs that we had done, especially in Chhattisgarh, where it was a 17,000 reports from the villages that were aggregated into 16 district reports, and then they went into a state report. Many of the successes that you find in Chhattisgarh in terms of development now, I believe, go back to the that experiment where the government took up this initiative, where actually the people were able to understand their situation. Just to take 1 minute more, I would say that the village report had 3 parts. What is the history of the village? What is the vision that people have for the village? The third and most interesting part, what are they willing to contribute and what do they want the government to contribute? I think this was the part of every village, 17,000 such reports. 2,000 were lost due to the insurgents tearing them off. But otherwise, 17,000 villages, the reports have been gathered. People were sensitized. When they are sensitized and they understand the situation, they are able to participate and contribute to making that reality, the development a reality. I'm not saying everything is hunky-dory in Chhattisgarh, but there is some element of recognition and participation. And you will find even in the remotest of areas, even in Narayanpur and others, the PHCs are functioning. And even in Bastar, you do find some of the facilities that are functioning. And I would say that there is no alternative. We have exhausted all the easy solutions. And they are no longer the low-hanging fruit that we can pluck. We need to transform the way we function. We need to transform the way that cities and urban areas are looked at. And we cannot look at urban areas in isolation of the rural-urban continuum. And without enhancing the capabilities of the people, I do not think the attention will change anything. And whether we take the SDGs, okay, another only 10 years. And we are losing, we have already slipped behind. There's no progress. We have actually slipped behind at least 5 years. In which case, what is it that we can do? 1 or 2 things that we can do which will transform the way in which we make policy, that transform the way in which we discuss issues, is what is the burning question right now. I think that is what we need to look. 1 or 2 levers, which if we operate on, other things start changing by themselves. And we have a huge civil society that is there, which is willing to and looking for participation from people like us. So I think it can be a good coalition of people, like-minded people, and without having any political overtones, I think it can be possible. If people start demanding better facilities, things will improve. So I think that is the way we need to go about. And maybe I've gone off the agenda, but I do think this is the agenda. To me, this is the agenda, because I think we need to talk about the trade-offs. What are the trade-offs if we take one policy? Okay, but what are the other trade-offs that it will bring? And how do we address the urban issue, which is so closely interlinked with so many other goals and so many other dimensions of life? So, and how do we put people at the center? And how do we enhance their participation and their capabilities and enable the people to claim their cities? I think right to cities was sometime articulated in 2010, but we need to go beyond the right to cities and make it a lively, livable hub where people can participate, contribute, and make it worthwhile, where human flourishing can actually happen, and where there is humane governance rather than just political governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Seetha Prabhu. And it's true that the current vulnerability of the cities and even more for that of the informal settlements to the pandemic is not purely accidental, but a logical result of the type of cities that we have built. And also, ma'am, you'll be happy to know that at IMPRI also is involved with the preparation of the SDG report at Ranchi city. We actually got a fund from Action Aid India, and also based on some our earlier works, we have prepared this report, but it's just got delayed because of this pandemic. The release of we are actually coming up with a book on this particular report. And at a personal level, I'm also involved with the preparation of human development report at the district level for Birbhum district. So there we did a field survey, and also we use the available secondary database. So it's also, again, the report has not been published, but because of this election and all these things, so maybe within few months it will be published. So I'll be happy to share a copy of that with you for your comments. So, okay, thank you again. And then let me just move over to Mr. Tikender Panwar for your comments.
Or Jyoti ma'am, would you like to respond?
No, I think.
Yeah,
I'm audible now.
Yes.
Is it? Okay, great.
So I think let's first have the points of Mr. Tikender Panwar, and then it will be easier for Professor Chandiramani to
Right. Tikender sir, your video.
My video, okay, yeah.
So what do you?
Thank you,
Mr. Panwar.
Thanks, Dr. Soumyadip. And hi, Kirti bhai. It's nice to see you there. Yeah. Thank you, but I am extremely sorry because I couldn't join in the beginning, so I really missed what Professor Jyoti spoke about. But I can understand what when Professor Seetha was speaking about the SDGs and the interventions required, and also Kirti bhai mentioning about the Second Urban Commission. In fact, I was very staunchly going to support the demand for the Second Urban Commission. Please excuse me, because since I was not a party to the initial discussion, so I am not sure actually what I am speaking. But yeah, going by the subject about India's urban transformation marching towards sustainable development goals, I think that to me the lens that I view cities and the entire urban sphere, I think I just go back to some of the basic points. I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about sustainability of the people or sustainability of capital? And when I say, because, why this is very important, and this I got reminded when I think Professor Seetha or Professor or Kirti bhai, I'm not sure, pointed about the ease of living indices and all those indices that we are drawing, and those city resilience index that we are drawing. Massive data is flooding in the cities, not maybe all, but tier 2 and some of the state capitals. We have all those reports, right, from the HPRAs, the hazard vulnerability risk assessments. But at the end of the day, what is it that is happening? I think so. Unless and until we go at the macro level and the meta level, and that's what Kirti bhai has been advocating, without a massive national urban commission, actually, small interventions that we're trying to do, I mean, it could really suffice. It could really provide a solace to my heart that, look, this is what I've done. But I don't think we are going to go anywhere near to what actually should happen. And when I say what actually should happen is from the lens that I view cities and urban sector. So therefore, going back to, by the way, Dr. Soumyadip, how much time do I have?
Yes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, fine. So 5 minutes. Okay, I'll try to finish off in 5 minutes. Yeah. So 5 minutes it takes time. At times it takes the rhythm to build up in 5 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, but I'll try to finish it in 5 minutes. So why I was so concerned about the ease of living index, and I went down and then I wrote one article on the hoax of these indices. The agency that was actually engaged to draw these indices, and I actually brought in that aspect. Professor Parker, who's heading that institute, actually speaks about, he doesn't speak about sustainability of people, he speaks about sustainability of capital. So he says, I mean, it's a real challenge in the world. I mean, if we have to really advance, how do we sustain capital by large? And this brings me to another discourse, and I do not know whether Kirtibhai mentioned it, because I really loved in one of his sessions when he said, when he spoke about the second UN habitat, Professor Kirtibhai, I hope you remember when you spoke about revolution. Without a revolution, you can't get anything. And you spoke about the then executive director, vociferously making those points. So, and I was not there, but I was there in Habitat 3 in Quito, where John Kloss, and he on similar channels, similar lines, what Kirtibhai has been saying about the UN Habitat 2, kept on reminding us that, look, the basic problem that we are facing in the world and also in India is, unless until we get rid of this whole business of laissez-faire, the free market economy, and treating cities as areas of investment, and building those competitive cities. So cities actually meant to attract investment, not really people coming to the fore. And this transformation that we are witnessing, this transformation when we speak about sustainable development goals, that's why I said is it sustainability of the people or sustainability of capital, from the managerial part of the city to treating cities as entrepreneurs. So you have a competition between Calcutta and Mumbai. So you make changes, you just bring in complete transformation in city governance, and that is one of the foremost contradictions that exists in the cities. And so and the foremost contradictions, because you have a process after the 74th constitutional amendment whereby you have some 18 items and the 12th schedule that should have been transferred to the city governments, but then we find not even 3 or 4 have actually been transferred. But at the same time, why? Now, I'm very clear about that, Dr. Soumyadip. There are no doubts, because earlier I used to be, I used to bring in from now it's absolutely clear. And I think this pandemic has exposed us just like anything. The hollowness of all our jargons that we have created, CRIs and all that stuff that we built. Surat, one of the finest, and I think it's also a city which is considered to be the Rockefeller, that stuff we have in the world, Rockefeller, resilient city of the world. The first city where it couldn't hold its migrant people even for 24 hours, and the people started migrating back. So what cities are we building? So I think where is the problem by? And I think I go back to John Kloss. This whole business, unless we go to the basics of planning. For whom are we planning the cities? Are we planning cities to attract capital, investment, and then that will percolate? We've seen, it's all bullshit. This is not happening, by the way. So I think some radical, this has to change. And then this also, this leads me to the second point, and that is, this whole nexus that exists. And the nexus, I have no fear in saying, I'm telling you, Dr. Soumyadip, the kind of nexus that exists in the ministry, and right from the top, when this whole idea of smart cities was conceived, who will frame it, what will be the contours drawn for these smart cities, and actually who would be the consultant. So this nexus between the consultant-driven development that we are witnessing in the city, instead of what Professor Seetha was speaking about, this transformation, not per se development in that old fashion that we're talking about. So we've seen that, haven't we? And then these consultants come to your towns. When I was the oh my God, what is happening? Can you just give me 1 second? Can you hold on, because my battery is dying? I'll just need to charge it. Just give me 1 second.
I think sir has dropped out. No. Samir, can we go to Samir sir? Samir sir, are you there?
Sorry.
Okay, sir has come. Okay.
Yeah,
Tikender,
just
please.
yeah. So where was I? Yeah. So I think, and when I was serving the city of Shimla for 5 years, being the directly elected deputy mayor, so then these consultants, they enter your town and they have a very strong network with your MOUD at the center. They say, hey, you don't know how to run the city. So let us plan your development strategies. Because you don't have the capacity. I mean, you don't have people. I mean, look at the way you are functioning. So they will build your resilience indices. They will build your city development plans. They will build your city sanitation plans. And then, where's the money going to come from? Buddy, we'll get the money. So we'll get the money from various agencies. And then if you see this nexus, most of these plans actually land up A, in no result, and B, even if there is a result, then it is for most of these towns actually advocate for more capital intensive technologies, where ultimately once again the burden falls on the people. And we've seen this humongous amount of inequity that has existed. And this is Professor Kirti Bhai that I need to remind time and again. I mean, the stark difference that exists between the first urban commission and if at all the new urban commission has come up. I haven't gone to all your reports, but I mean the gist that I could find out in the first urban commission was that actually it was to meet the challenges of a growing manufacturing, urban centers. When the first urban commission was. Is it now? I mean, hardly our cities are actually centers of manufacturing goods, or even new to that. So this transformation that has taken place from large scale organized sector to almost 93-94% informality or unorganized sector in the cities is like you've got a completely different understanding of how actually we need to intervene. For example, like Professor Seetha was speaking about migrants. I mean, it's not even discussed. I mean, even in the 74th constitutional amendment, I mean, there's no word about that. But they comprise one of the important quintessential elements of the present day challenges that we face. So yeah, I think that is something very important. And but then how should we go about it? What is to be done? We know the present discourse. I mean, it's not a hidden fact. We also know that despite all such engagements, despite all our galvanizing people and building new nuances and really enacting the present government, that look, it's a complete holocaust that you've done. Take for example the pandemic, how nothing is going to move. We know that, and so I mean, do we expect an urban commission? Maybe we do. And what do we expect? I mean, they created that NUPF, the National Urban Policy Framework. And you remember we did the hell lot of exercise actually bringing an alternative, and they said, hey, we don't even own this document. So what do you do in such a situation? Today they create a document, tomorrow they say we don't even own the document. Can we push for some alternative state-led urban commissions where I know this actually can be experimented, because Tamil Nadu, just now we have a new government. For example, Maharashtra, probably if we're able to push, we can understand that some discussions can go on if we do not have a national urban commission. At least those discussions can come up, which should be slightly different from what the large consultants at the global level are actually asking most of us to actually follow the path. So can you just build that alternative path? And something which I have always been advocating, I don't know, maybe it sounds too utopian. I think it's high time that we should demand for a fourth list, like the union list, the state list, the concurrent list, and the fourth local bodies list. I think we desperately require that. I mean, after without an entitlement, I mean, look at the way Kejriwal is. Kirti Bhai, I mentioned your name, by the way, because you've always been eulogizing Kejriwal, and see what they've done to him after the new Parliament Act. But we desperately, I think, need to argue for local bodies list, whereby at least land, at least some basic functions. Of course, course, it is part of the 74th Constitutional Amendment. It's quite wide, quite. And at the end, as Dr. Soumyadip, I told you the lens that I come from, and I view this humongous inequity. I mean, to me, urban centers have become centers of massive accumulation of capital. And as Samuel Stein points out, I've been quoting this time and again, I am not sure, because this is what IMPRI has to do. We need to find out which is the primitive, which is the foremost mode of accumulation of capital in India. Maybe it's finance capital, but as Samuel Stein points out, it's the real estate development in US. Most of the primary mode of capital accumulation is taking place with that. So this humongous inequity that is also existing. We've seen it in health. We've seen it in the education sector. All that, what we used to discuss in political economy, use value for a society, has commodified into exchange value. You can really commoditize education. This is not what was heard when I was a student activist, when I was a student leader in the universities. I mean, it was considered to be my right, to have free education. It's no more. And so, your Vedantus and all. So this huge inequity has also led to massive deprivation of assets, asset holding, and the capacity of the people to own assets. And with the kind of urban interventions that is happening, smart cities or other forms of interventions, we are further widening the gap. Actually, we are not reducing that gap. So I think, to me, when we speak about sustainability, how do we democratize this surplus, the phenomenal amount of surplus that is getting generated in the cities? How do I democratize it? There are various ways. It's not that it's not happened. Since I don't have time, I would have shared some of the interventions that we did in Shimla, where the most critical area of sanitation, how we were able to actually formalize it, bring it into the organized sector, provide some relief. So yeah, and even urban employment guarantee scheme, I think we need to really discuss about that. Can we provide some kind of relief to that? So yeah, so last minute, but to me, I think, Dr. Soumyadip, it's nowhere near. We're nowhere near the sustainability. I mean, if you speak about sustainability of people, it's a real challenge. We are entering into a real disaster, I'm telling you. And so demonetization exposed us. Then the first lockdown exposed us how badly we are fated, and this pandemic has completely, it's exposed the hollowness of the system, and especially the urban centers that we are living in. And just recently, I think just yesterday probably, I read the CMI report that there's 34 lakh actually salary jobs were lost just in April 2021. So how are we compensating that as a state, maybe as a state in a structure? And where is the state, by the way? I mean, if you need to ask, do you know? I mean, I have actually been getting frantic calls. I'm sure, Dr. Soumyadip, you have been getting so many calls. Get a bed, oxygen, patients. What is it that we're doing? Is it sustainable?
Well, so thank you, Mr. Panwar, for making for sharing your comments and also making two very important suggestions like this state level commission on urbanization and also the fourth list. Okay, so I'm sure that Professor Jyoti will respond to your suggestion. So now let me request Mr. Samir Unhale, who is the Joint Commissioner, Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra, to share your comments. And I request Mr. Unhale to please be specific.
I will be my briefest possible. I can understand your impediment.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So I hope you understand our.
I know. I can definitely understand. So first of all, must congratulate Jyoti Madam. On and off, I was watching the presentation, which was very precise and did cover the larger canvas of major milestones in urban transformation of India. I would be restricting myself to the concept of SDGs and cities. Very often SDGs becomes a very broad subject, and then many issues get discussed, and the focus area then requires to be shifted off. I would first of all, if you look at SDGs, of the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets, and I think more than 300 indicators. As we know, Thane Smart City, when I was there working earlier, we had been aspiring to become the first SDG city of India. In fact, if you Google down of SDG and Thane, you would get many such hits on SDGs and cities. So first of all, we'll have to understand that if you try to look on what SDGs are, so I think very often they do cover the directive principles and the fundamental rights of our constitution. So in fact, if you look at so it is a good thing that the international community is trying to achieve some consensus on the basic idea of what development and what welfare could really mean. Because, when we have got ideologies and when we have got politics, then the main focus gets away and we return to the idea of zero-sum game as to who is winning and who is losing. And the basic focus on the ideas of development welfare are lost. So first of all, I look at these SDGs from this perspective, that this is an international consensus as to what development and what welfare could really mean for all the humanity for that. Secondly, if you focus on what a city could be doing with SDGs. So we had done an exercise with the help of IIT Bombay. I think Citra and CP are there in IIT Bombay. And we had tried very simple match the following, that we have got 169 targets. Let's try to correlate that with the 12th schedule. Let's try to correlate that with the act, the municipal act of the state, as to which factors are being considered and which have not been considered. It was a very simple match to following to do the deep dive as to what the 169 targets of SDGs are compared to the functions and duties obligatory and discretionary of the municipal corporation and the municipal council. So this did give us that what we are trying to have our Indian model of welfare and development is somewhere getting an international thumbs up. That what our directive principles were, whatever the framework of welfare administration was, what we tried to do with the democratic decentralization. So I think there is emerging a fairly broad consensus in which even the UN and all the 190 signatories to that, and it might be with the Paris Accord and all other things. So we are getting a broader consensus at international level as to what we actually did. I think it's an endorsement of the framework what India tried to do, of course, along with the other important ideas globally. So that was my second take on SDGs vis-a-vis cities. Thirdly, we tried to, as I said, we did this exercise of doing this match the following of municipal duties and the SDG targets. And thirdly, we extended that to the municipal budget. I think it was last year actually. So when I was still working there, so it was 2020-21 municipal budget, which had a SDG component to that budget. In fact, we tried to that municipal budget is about brass tacks. It's about budget heads and sub-budget heads and minor budget heads. We tracked every budget head to a particular SDG. And in a way, it was revelation for me that almost 90% of the municipal budget was getting mapped to one or either of the SDGs, which was quite a revelation for us, because we thought SDG is something very new idea, SDG is something alien. That's not the case. And this deep dive we did with the help of students, PhD students, and some other of our municipal staff of absolute clerical level. I mean, so these are the findings that we had, that the municipal act includes most of the SDGs, discretionary, non-discretionary, optional functions, which most of the states have the similar acts. They might be one function on and off. But most of the municipal acts are comparable vis-a-vis the functions which are discretionary and the obligatory function the municipality has. So, and then when we try to extend that to the budget, that ultimately in government, finally the budgetary allocations to a particular reflects whether the probability of it being done is there or not. And then I hope I'm audible. The SDG budget that we tried to do did help us a lot. It did give us an inclination. Of course, all the 169 targets are not relevant to the municipal functioning. They are not relevant to the municipal functioning yet, as was rightly mentioned earlier by our earlier speaker, that the cross connections of or intersectoral linkages of a particular activity does exist into the municipal laws and the obligations which a corporation has to fulfill. So this particular exercise of budgeting did give us that the primacy to a particular area needs to be evolved, because if this SDGs 169 targets are flat targets. There is no primacy to one or to another. It's up to the municipal or the local authority or the regional or the central government to decide how a primacy has to be given to which target or to the which topic. So that exercise did give us that some focus was more on a particular type of budget heads, or the some focus is primacy is somehow getting more to a particular target rather than the remaining target. So this was a very good analytical exercise that we could do of comparing and evaluating the normal municipal functioning and finding that we are very much aligned to the SDGs as far as the budgetary allocations are concerned. Issue would come of primacy, how the allocation would be done. So that did give us a target, and now, now taking up taking more of a state role now. We in fact have formed a committee at under my chairmanship of trying to extend this concept of SDGs, operationalizing SDGs and the process of that to the other smaller municipal bodies that we normally function with. So that was, I think, Soumyadip, this would be a small and short ideas and personal reflections, as I keep on reiterating. These are my personal reflections on this topic, on very narrowly on the cities and SDGs. So thank you, Soumyadip.
Thank you, Mr. Ronaldo. So now just let me go back straight to Professor Jyoti Chandiramani for your response to all the points which have been there in our discussion today.
Yeah, a whole horde of
it's over to you.
Discussion has taken place, and with so many points of view and perspectives. So I'll actually go back with what Samir Unhale Prof said, because he talked about mapping this framework of the SDGs with the functions of the SDG indicators, with the functions of the of the urban local body, and with the budgets. And I want to say that we have done the same thing. And not only that, we have even mapped it with the ease of living index, and we find a great deal of convergence that does come about it. Now, I'll give you an example. We've done the district-wise SDGs of Maharashtra for NABARD. And while you look at it, you find that the districts do very well on education front. That was one of the parameters it did very well on. But that's because the infrastructure is what we are measuring. That does not mean that the quality of the education is good. Just because you have a gate, just because you have a building wall, just because you have classrooms, just because you have a classroom teacher ratio, it does not translate into the learnings, and that a standard 5 student can do standard 5 mathematics. Because then you will have to go to the SR report and you will see that is one of the things that get bypassed. So I want to tell Samir sir that we have also been doing work on this, and I go by that we've done a mapping and there is a convergence. Coming back to Dr. Seetha's point, that we must distinguish between transformation and development. I totally agree, but you can only transform when the basic livability aspects are there in place. So over the years, you're looking at, are you getting 135 liters of water? Are you getting 24/7 electricity? We are kind of reaching that point in various cities at this junction. So that is one aspect that I'd like to bring in, that yes, cities are looking at how this comes in. You look at the European cities, and when you look at the European cities, you realize one thing, that they have, after the basics have been in place, therefore the citizens are then um, very much into sustainability or understanding the philosophy of inclusion, etc. They do have basic income schemes over there where there is unemployment dole, etc. We don't have all this. So the first thing that you really have to look at is, do you have the basics of life and living? That itself is transformatory, in my opinion, and that's one of the things that we talk about in times to go. Look at the COVID situation today, for example. All the vaccinations for 18 to 45 plus are available not in private hospitals. So it's there in municipal hospitals or government hospitals. So you will have a different way of people going in. So it's actually taking the bottom-up approach in a lot of ways. Coming back to another point, which Simi did talk about, is that there is inclusion of diverse voices and aspirations in urban transformation. Again, this varies from city to city. The city that I come from has even a ward-wise budget. All right, but that is not the case with every city. How many cities are putting up their budgets on their website in both the local language and English so that you can do an academic study about it? It's not that easily available. You have to actually go through. In fact, my PhD student had to take the last 10 years data and translate it from the local language into English before she could work on that. So that itself takes time when we're looking at it. So these things are a little tough, and we need to look at it from that point of view. When Simi asked me about the transformation paradox, yes, I think I've answered that question. But when she's talking about inclusion of diverse voices and aspirations in the urban transformation process, one of the aspects, Simi, here is that participatory budgeting, participatory governance, inclusion of people at the ward level to come up. When your, even when your urban plan is put up and your budgets are put up for people to respond, it's then at the point of the citizen who comes to respond to these issues. But yes, not all cities do talk about this. Very often it is a top-down approach. But I have to also say these days that when you look at water, the first place where water will invariably go, and you will see less amount of water cuts, at least in some parts that we are associated with, would be that it would go first to the slums. And I'm very happy about those kind of little transformations which come in case study approach of best practices or some amount of anecdotal evidences that we talk about. Another point that you talked about was paradox of participation. I mean, people mentioned that JNNU-RM was a total failure or whatever. I don't agree with that totally. I felt it didn't have the capacity to, cities have to have the capacity to absorb investment. So while allocation is there, if there is no capacity to absorb investment in terms of human resources, in terms of governance, in terms of institutions, those are something that need to be strengthened. So capability building and capacity building is the next aspect. And the smart cities that have come in have tried to change the governance structure by bringing in SPVs. So therefore, there is an absolute, bypassing of the democratization of the process, where a particular school of thought feels that the democratization didn't bring about the reforms that you were looking at. Or not bring about reforms, I'm sorry, but bring about the changes that you were looking at. So these are contradictions where we are commenting on it. We are monitoring it. In fact, Kirtiji and we have worked on 10 smart cities of Maharashtra. And we've actually talked about the special purpose vehicles that have come in, the consultancies that have come in, which was even pointed out by Mr. Tikender Panwar, when he spoke about this. So I think these are my responses, and over to you, Soumyadip.
So thank you. And there are some Q&A, and just I'm looking at those Q&A. So all these are, I think already you have touched all these aspects regarding the participatory practices and all these things. Just one question there is, what about the suitability of SDG index, like to rank the cities? If you just could comment on this.
See, the SDG index when in 2019, which was done at the state level, had, I think 68 parameters, if I'm not mistaken. And by the time the 21 came, 2021 came, it had 100 parameters. Okay. Now 100 variables or indicators, as you may talk about. This is, of course, a part of convenience, because what is available, you tend to measure. But very often, we must not just go by the measurement. We have to go deep diving. Seetha ji spoke so well about, looking at doing field work and coming back with reports, with village cards, with, village stories as what are their aspirations and what do they want. I remember doing something like this in slums in 2014, in the month of May. And you would not believe it. Nobody talked about sanitation needs in slums. They were not there. There were homes. We actually took on respondents who did not have toilets at home. But they were interested in three basic aspects. One was education for the children, two was health, and three was livelihoods. Sanitation, they said it's fine, we can use community toilets. I was absolutely aghast or shocked when this kind of findings did come in. But of course, that is very much on the cards. So when you talk about SDGs, I think it's going to be very difficult. What is going to be measured may not necessarily give you the right picture. You'll have to do a deep diving, and it would have to be city-based case study approach. And I think these are things that we should really look at. Like we need to see what is your Ranchi study and compare it with what we have done at district levels for the districts of Maharashtra. Because whether you do it at the city level or the district level, the data that you get comes out from the district level parameters.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Again, I think this census data last year, they have come up, it actually gives them ward level data. So that's for the first time, 2011 census data gives you all the basic amenities related data at the ward level. So that is one of the important.
But taking 2011 data in 2020.
Picture of 2011 census data. So,
but my point here is taking 2011 data in 2020 and talking about something which has been a decade of change to a very large extent, is not going to give the true picture. It may be much better in terms of service delivery, but it may not be good in terms of equity and inclusion.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you, Professor Jyoti. And just before wrapping it up, let me just move on to all our discussions. For the quick comments in a minute, I request all of you to share your comments in a minute. Let me start with again, Dr. Simi Mehta. Are you there, Simi?
So we can move next.
Okay, so Mr. Tikender Panwar, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, what is it that you asked? I just missed that. Can you repeat?
Just some points in a minute.
No, I don't have to edit anything. I don't have to add anything else. Just
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Just
okay,
that.
No
I mean, what we require is a systemic change, Dr. Soumyadip, a systemic change, and I think that's something. Very essential according to me. I mean, of course, small interventions do help, and we've seen how these have actually tried to work out. But to bring an alternate narrative that we're talking about, I think the present form in which we are working is like complete alienation of the people. I mean, what we are doing is completely alienating them. This won't succeed, and neither would this succeed, nor would the Sustainable Development Goals. Mark my words.
Well, so these are very strong words. So, well, so let me move over to Dr. Simi. So, over to you.
Yes, thank you, sir. I will, to conclude, I will just echo what Professor Seetha had said, that there is a need for decentralization and democratization of data using local participation. And secondly, about the ranking of cities, if we take the example of Swachh Sarvekshan, barring a few cities, the magnitude of efforts that are being made, it's really half-hearted, and any common person just walking around the city would provide the most accurate description of how swachh or how clean her or his city is. So to what extent is this kind of ranking of cities instilling and inspiring healthy competition remains an open question. And I think I would not shy away from saying that it is only those areas which have high degree of VIP movement that are made or are kept swachh, and the rest of the areas they experience status quo. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And now, is Mr. Shah is with us?
No, sir. Samir sir also is not
No,
here.
okay. So, okay.
Yeah.
So then let me request Professor Seetha Prabhu to say just a few words.
Yeah,
just to
thank you
conclude
very
this
much.
session.
A very interesting discussion overall. I think several dimensions have come up in this discussion. I would only say that my point about looking at transformation and not focus only on development. Agreed that development is a prerequisite for transformation. But the question is, what type of development? Are we looking only at the provision of basic necessities, which is absolute must and it is a given? But I also think we need to transform the way in which we interact with people and the way in which we plan for the cities, and look at the ways in which we can provide the urban areas, make them a bit more habitable, much more participatory, and where citizens feel they have a right to the city. That I think is essential, rather than be treated as outsiders, for example, the migrants, and not be inclusive. So I think a more sensitivity in terms of the policies that we are formulating and the ways in which they're being implemented, greater synergies between the various sectors. I think that is an absolute must if we have to achieve habitat that is more livable, and participation, of course, I would stress. And most of all, I would also stress the importance of data, and data that is owned by the people, and in some ways a decentralized level. I think we have to step up the efforts much more, and partnership between civil society and academic and government agencies is absolute must. Or just sum up with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Seetha Prabhu. And then let me just again request Professor Chandiramani for if you want to add something else just before wrapping it up.
I just would like to say a thank you, and I think it was very interesting to hear so many insights. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you all the panelists, because it's really an engrossing session, and this COVID-19 crisis, as I see, that must be approached as an opportunity to replace the evidence of SDG gaps into the context of policies and practices to better build the urban resilience for the future. And once again, on behalf of Team IMPRI, I am thankful to all the discussions and our chair, Professor Prabhu, our main speaker, Professor Jyoti Chandiramani, and all the discussion, Mr. Tikender, Panwar, Dr. Simi, Mehta, Mr. Kirti Shah, and Mr. Unhale for joining us today. And also, we will be continuing with these city conversation series, where we will be addressing some of the key challenges that not only the Indian cities face, but all the cities all over the global south are facing. So, and we hope your participation in the future city conversation series as well. So thank you once again, and good night to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. Good night.